Hi, I'm Elaine. I spend most of my time worrying about retirement. Oh, no, I don't mean my retirement. I mean the retirement of 144 million Americans who comprise our workforce today. You see, my livelihood, my vocation, my mission in life is to help ensure working Americans can retire on their own terms so that they can have choices and so that they have dignity in their later years. As a result, I do think a lot about retirement. I also think about the choices people will have in retirement. You know, things like where will they live? What will they eat? Will they have the resources to pursue their passions after a lifetime of work? All of these questions can have very different answers depending upon how well prepared one is. Times are changing, and fewer people have traditional pensions, leaving the burden of savings and planning for retirement squarely on their shoulders. Our reality is that many won't be prepared, and therefore they will not have choices. In fact, there are about 32 million baby boomers today. That's out of about 76 million. They may never be able to retire. They certainly won't have choices that we may want them to have. That's enough people, by the way, to fill the state of California. Listen, folks, we have more work to do. There are about 98 million U.S. workers who have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan where they can save money before taxes are taken out of their paycheck and put into investments in a savings plan. The money grows over time to be spent living in retirement after a life of work. Of that 98 million, about 77 million working Americans currently are enrolled in the plan, both male and female. Now, a recent report from the Government Accountability Office shows that women generally earn 23% less than men. Were you aware of that, ladies? 23%. Actually, that's improving, I have to tell you. And less than half of them are actually enrolled in their retirement programs at work. Women save at an average rate of about 6.7% compared to 7.2% for men. Now, you think that that small difference isn't all that large, but in actuality, over a 40-year working life, compound interest does wonders. And as a consequence, the balances for women today in their retirement savings program are about 38% less than men. Did you know that? This leads me to worry more about women. I really worry about their choices. And you know, in many ways it seems contradictory as well because, you see, women are the engines in many ways of our economy. They own 40% of small businesses in America, and they employ over 13 million people. Women control over $20 trillion of assets around the world. But for some reason, this financial firepower just doesn't translate into taking actions for a secure retirement. Only 54% of women are interested in investments compared to 72% of men. Women are also less confident about having enough money to live and work after their working life is complete. You know, it makes me think of my Polish grandmother, Elaine Sarsynski, who immigrated from Poland in 1895. Can you imagine this 14-year-old alone, like millions before her, walking through the Great Hall at Ellis Island? What was she thinking? Can you imagine? She married my grandpa at 17 years old, and she raised a family and helped my grandfather slowly acquire acre after acre of land. My grandma's retirement was really based on the money that she and my grandpa saved on their family farm while they were raising their 6 children. She had very little Social Security because Social Security started in 1935, so she was well on her way to being an adult, well over into her 40s at that time. She had no pension. The ingredient for her, though, was savings. That's what made her retirement possible. Now let's fast forward a generation, and my mother is born in 1928. She would move to the family farm as a young bride and raise 5 children with my dad. My mom took a job outside the farm in a local community, and she made ends meet. She was a secretary for over 30 years. My mother would enjoy a few new additions to the retirement scene. She received a traditional pension. Now, it was actually a widow's pension. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And she had Social Security, as well as she had, I want to tell you about Social Security. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in 1935, this was the height of the Great Depression, the height. And he decided that Americans needed to have a safety net. So he put Social Security in place for those Americans that were down on their luck. But it was never meant to replace savings. So my mom, she's now 84, and she lives a frugal, yet very dignified retirement. She was, as I said earlier about the widow pension, she was widowed at 57. That was the average age, and it still is the average age of widowhood in the United States today. So it's so important for women to plan and to save. Now I have to say that my brothers and sisters and I are very thankful that she has her savings, her pension, and Social Security. Now let's go to my generation of my family's American story. That's something. That's my first ID for my work. Can you imagine? Look at that woman. Ooh. My 3 sisters and I settled in different parts of the country. We were certainly very fortunate to grow up on that farm, but we couldn't wait to get off of it either. So when I got out of college and started my first job, I had all the options my mother had. And one more, and that was I had a pension plan. I had Social Security that I could look forward to because I was taking the taxes out of my paycheck and putting it into the system. And I had this new thing called a 401k plan. It was an employer-sponsored saving plan. Now, this was about the early 80s that these things were starting to come out into the market. And I really didn't know very much about this plan. I looked like that. And how could I? But I did remember the holy grail of retirement, because my grandmother and my mother were such inspirations. And that holy grail, very simply, saving is good, not saving is bad. Saving is good, not saving is bad. So I poured as much as possible into my retirement plan at the time. And I did some simple arithmetic, nothing too difficult. And I decided that I could save about 10% of my salary, 10% of my paycheck. So I did that. And it's kind of interesting because if you take that number 10%, you save that today for about the next 4 decades or so, 3 or 4 decades, you'll have choices in retirement when you retire. Now, let's move to my 4th generation of my story, and that's my daughter, Stephanie. She's in college now. Oh gosh, her generation, they have so much to manage. School debt, credit card debt, the $16 trillion national debt. They live in a global world. They're always tied into social media. There are so many things that someone born in the Generation Y have to manage. Some of my retirement options afforded to me and to my mom, I don't think Stephanie will have them for her. She will likely not have a traditional pension, and I do believe that Social Security may look very different for her than it looks for me today. I just want to say that today, pensions, only about 20% of companies actually have traditional pensions today. That used to be 20 years ago, about 80%. So you can just see how that is changing over time. And they're likely to be fewer and fewer when Stephanie gets into the job market. So savings is still the key ingredient now, just as it was for my grandmother on that family farm 100 years ago. Circles always close. In fact, if Stephanie can save 10 to 12% of her salary for the next 40 years, she'll be on a good track towards having choices in retirement. You know, even if Stephanie doesn't have Social Security, it was never meant to replace savings. With advances in medical technology today, Stephanie could well live into her 90s, maybe even 100. And I can tell you that Social Security in 1935 certainly wasn't taking that into account. In fact, today, there are over 2 million Americans that are 90 years old or older. That number is expected to quadruple to 8 million in the next 40 years. Now, the good news is 75% of those 2 million people are women. Yes. Now, unfortunately, though, a woman in her 90s today lives on an average income per year of $13,500. You know, I just doubt that there are many choices to be had. So through 4 generations of my family, you've seen how the women and how retirement has changed over the last 100 years. Something, though, importantly has not changed, and that's that savings has always been, and it will always be, the key ingredient to having choices in retirement. Start by saving 10% of your salary or more if you're a little older, and get help if you need it. There are so many people out there that can help you, from your employer's pension department, human resource department, financial planners, and there's tons of information on the web. I spend a lot of time thinking about retirement. I want you to start taking a little time too and start thinking about the same thing. I'm Elaine. I want you to start saving. I want you to have choices. Thank you.